Welcome to B&W Insights. I am your host, Mark Seifert, and today is a love 'em or hate 'em episode. Whether you love them or you hate them, they're coming, and they're roundabouts. Today we have a conversation with our Vice President of Transportation, Jason Fleur, and let me tell you from the start of this episode, I hate them. But today, in our conversation with Jason, let's see if he can convince me different. Ready? Let's get started. All right, Jason, thank you for coming down to the podcast studio today. You know, I am excited for this conversation, but I want to know, how long have you been at Baxter Woodman, and what made you say, I want to work on roundabouts and be in charge of transportation?
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. I've been with Baxter and Woodman for 26 years. And are you really happy?
I am. I'm excited. I like a good argument. I like a good argument. I want to know. I've been, every time I drive around the Midwest now, it's like I see these signs and it's like, take 7th turn from the left. All right, I got to do math now while I'm driving. So, but before we get into the details, I think there's people out there still who have not experienced a roundabout. What is a roundabout? How did they come about? And really, what has brought about the influx in Northern Illinois?
So a roundabout is a circular intersection where the traffic on the inside of the circle does not yield, but rather the incoming traffic yields to the left, not stops. That's an important distinction, but yields to the traffic within the circular part of the intersection. And so why have they become more prevalent? Because quite simply, they're just a safer form of intersection control.
Okay.
And besides that, they're just cooler than traffic signals. Do traffic signals have a movie about them where the funniest part of the movie is a traffic signal? No. Roundabouts do.
Roundabouts are funny. I feel like every comedy has a good roundabout.
National Lampoon's European Vacation. Everyone knows that scene, right?
Absolutely. So where did roundabouts start? Is this something that has been around for 100 years, or is this something that has been more brought upon us in the last 10 to 15 years, or where did this all come about?
So roundabouts have been prevalent in Europe for well over 100 years.
Okay.
And, as I was preparing for this conversation too, I asked myself, why are they so prevalent in Europe and they've been so slow to take off in the United States? And I got a few different interesting answers that I found. The first being that when roundabouts took off in Europe, it was more because it was, it's a denser, more urbanized area. There's not as much space.
Yeah, no room for urban sprawl.
Right. In the United States, there was more space. And so rather than roundabouts, rotaries took off. And rotaries are essentially like a larger roundabout. So the speeds are a lot higher. And the yield works a little bit different. So the vehicles in the traveling circle yield to incoming vehicles, and vehicles coming in do not yield at all.
So it's like
backwards, yeah. So kind of a mess. And so those didn't work very well. There were a lot of accidents as well. So rotaries, not great. And so I think that really set the United States back a little bit as far as roundabouts. The other interesting answers that I found, too, is that with the electrification in the United States and the westward expansion, there was some very savvy salesmen that sold the public and decision makers on traffic signals.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense as our country continued to grow west. And, with the invention of cars happening after Europe was already somewhat grown, the United States, cars were, coming into more popularity before most of the westward part of the country was, built. So that's why we have so many more straight roads, I'm assuming, as well in the western part of our country, because they were out there. There was nothing else out there. They were just saying, how do we get from point A to point B? Let's make a straight line.
Yeah. The third answer that I found that was kind of funny too is that Europeans by nature are just more compromising. And so easier to navigate a roundabout, whereas Americans are more aggressive by nature. And we want to be told what we can do without consideration of what else is going on or other drivers that are around. Tell us when we can go and tell us when we have to stop.
I like that answer the best, I think. I think
that was written by a European writer for some reason.
You know what? I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that. But, it's interesting to see that even though these roundabouts are, if you claim safer, but we're making, there's all kinds of different ideas of how they came about, which really shows that their growth in the last few years, and I feel like in the last few years they've really grown, is not, there's no one common path. So to that point, why in the last 5 years are we seeing them pop up more?
Quite simply because they're just a safer form of intersection. They're the safest form of intersection.
Okay.
And as a transportation engineer, that's your primary guiding principle, is to save lives, vision zero. And so it's proven study after study that roundabouts reduce not only accidents, but injury accidents and fatalities by up to 80 to 90% on injuries and fatality-related accidents, and accidents as a whole between 25 and 50%. And so whereas tow trucks are going to arrive at a roundabout accident, ambulance oftentimes arrive at signalized intersection accidents.
So was there something that had happened in the last 5 to 10 years that really sparked this? Was it the study come out, or was it just that the thought process of communities and engineers and all of the developers had changed? Or I feel as though growing up, I didn't see them, and then recently it really took off. So what was that defining moment that really changed the thought process?
I think, really as transportation engineers over the last, 30, 40 years, maybe started to have a much sharper focus on safety and the vision zero, driving to zero fatalities, looking at different options and seeing how these have really worked in Europe, and started to bring those into to the United States. I think the first one wasn't in the U.S. until like 1990 or something like that.
Wow.
And so it's been long known in the transportation engineering community that it's a safer alternative. It just hasn't taken off because the public hasn't embraced them as much. But I think we're to the point where we're starting to overcome that to a certain extent, with most people, and maybe one more by the end of this episode.
Well, hopefully I get there. And I the reduction in crashes, the reduction in injuries is a huge part of moving to roundabouts. And you mentioned that the first one was in 1990, and that's pretty astonishing, in looking at a conversation that I've had with, the water industry and the wastewater industry, and seeing that Europe in terms of technology is really outpacing us, and to have something like that take this long to come to the United States is kind of crazy to think that we didn't have the first roundabout till 1990. When you were first designing, is that something that you were taught about, or did you have to learn this as you grew in your career?
I didn't learn anything about it in school, but as I got into my career more and designed several signalized intersections, the idea was I was learning more about the idea of roundabouts, attending classes about it, learning how to design them, talking to clients about this roundabouts being a potential solution. And so just got more and more interested as I learned more and more, especially about the safety aspect of roundabouts.
So you mentioned a couple times Vision Zero. For those of us, myself included, and then the people listening, what is Vision Zero? That's a term that's new to me.
Vision Zero is something that we've embraced in the transportation industry as driving towards zero roadway fatalities.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a lofty goal that you're probably never going to get to, but if you were to say driving towards 100 fatalities. Is that acceptable? No, we should be striving for
0.
having the roadways as safe as possible.
I actually love the fact that you and the entire transportation community are really pushing towards bringing down accidents, bringing down fatalities. And you're right. Don't strive to have some. Strive to have none. With the advances in modern technology, and you look at one of the biggest things to help transportation safety was the seatbelt. That's huge. And now roundabouts and all these things that are continually working to make driving safer. It's the thing most of us do every day.
Yeah, and seatbelts, they weren't embraced right away either, right?
No.
I mean, there was several people that refused for years to ever wear a seatbelt, and now it's second nature. So
yeah, I think there were states that didn't have seatbelt laws for the longest time. So as we see this continual growth, maybe roundabouts are the next thing that is that wave of this is how we have to design. This is the new standard. As you look towards designing a roundabout, what are there certain conditions you look for to where a roundabout works better than a signalized intersection, or is there how do you weigh the pros and the cons of this intersection would be great for a roundabout, but this one really needs to be signalized and this one needs to be a 4-way?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that you need to take into consideration with a roundabout. A roundabout certainly isn't the answer everywhere. So a roundabout is going to have a greater footprint at the intersection. And so not every intersection can handle that. You might have buildings up close to the right-of-way, or the right-of-way might not be available. So whereas there's a bigger footprint at the intersection, there's less of a footprint away from the intersection because you don't need turn lanes and things like that.
Right.
So that's one consideration. Second consideration is the average traffic that you're going to have at the intersection. A general rule of thumb is 25,000 vehicles or less per day is about the maximum for a single lane roundabout.
Okay.
Otherwise, when roundabouts break down, they break down pretty spectacularly with gridlock, as you've probably seen before. So traffic, and then also traffic distribution. So if you have more of an equal distribution of traffic amongst the 4 legs, that's when it works really well. If you have an arterial road, for example, that has a lot more traffic than any of the side streets, it's not a great idea to be slowing down that main arterial,
right.
For the minor roads to be able to come into the intersection. So a lot of different considerations before you decide that that's the right way to go.
So I like how you mentioned it's not the right situation all the time, but I feel like there's a lot of myths out there about roundabouts of do they slow traffic down? Are they actually more dangerous? What are some of those myths that you hear that you try to dispel on when you're talking to your clients?
Well, one of the biggest myths is that they're more dangerous. They're not. I mean, it's proven study after study. The National Highway Institute, who's funded by the auto insurance companies, they've come out with their own studies, and they've determined that roundabouts are significantly safer. There's and some of that misperception too comes from when a new roundabout is opened. Sometimes there are fender benders. There are more accidents maybe in that first year as people get used to them.
Well, we are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
And if I have to do something different on my morning drive in, I may miss it once or twice.
But again, these are going to be side swipes. These are tow trucks, not ambulance types of incidents. And so because you're eliminating the head-on collision or the T-bone. And so they're just a lot less severe accidents. So that's one of the myths. Another myth is that they're not any more efficient. They are more efficient when they're designed properly and at the right location. So less emissions in the air, less wasted time sitting at a traffic signal. And I'd say another misconception is that trucks or emergency vehicles or snow plows or things like that can't navigate through those, and that's false as well. That those can be designed to accommodate whatever you might need, even if you need large trucks carrying windmill blades, 100 foot long. You can design to accommodate those types of trucks if you know what is going to be used in the intersection.
So a big part of traffic design is also on the planning side of what may develop in this area, because most times roundabouts we're seeing are being put in first before the development happens, because you have the open space, as you mentioned, a larger footprint. You don't see many roundabouts going in an urbanized area where there's the tight quarters. So really part of a roundabout is what is that growth and what's those projections in that area going to be, right?
Yeah, that absolutely. That's a big part of it. Understanding the roadway user and the number of vehicles and traffic distribution. That's a huge part of designing the roundabout.
So I think something that as I continue to drive around and travel through this area is I see some roundabouts with a raised interior and some with a flat interior. Is that just aesthetics or is that for design purposes?
No, almost everything on a roundabout is for design purposes. So what you are probably seeing is the truck apron. And so the way that's designed is, for example, trucks are meant to overtrack onto the inside of the roundabout. And so it's not going to be a full 6-inch high curb, but it might be a 2 or 3 inch mountable curb. It could be dyed concrete. They can make it aesthetic. But it serves a purpose for off-tracking semis. Then there's some that are more flush, and those are more mini roundabouts where you don't have the footprint to be able to make a full-size roundabout. And so a mini roundabout can work, and the reason that it would be flush is because on those few occasions where you have a large truck, they need to be able to drive straight through the middle of the roundabout.
Right. So, obviously probably the biggest misconception and one that I came into today thinking is that it takes longer for me to drive around instead of just driving straight. So I assume there's a study out there showing that there's a bigger chance of me getting stopped at a stop sign or stoplight than actually getting a green light.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you never had to stop at a traffic signal before?
I try to plan them, speed up a little bit, slow down a little bit,
But yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's just the lost time waiting because a traffic signal, not only are you going to have to stop at a red, but every time it changes the phase from one direction to another, you have 6 seconds of lost time as it goes from the yellow to the red, where nobody theoretically is going through the intersection. And so every time it changes, that's 6 seconds that nobody is moving, where a roundabout
that adds up too.
It absolutely rounds up.
How does, in talking about, the addition of time and the addition of time and the addition of time and, I've always wondered, and I think people across the country have wondered, is how can we not in 2025 have streetlights that are all green, going one way and then change, and then just like synchronize these things for miles upon miles. I think that's how they did it in the Jetsons back in the day. So where are we at with that?
Well, that's there, but that's intersections are often interconnected with fiber optic cable. And so theoretically, like on a main road, that will happen. But I know a lot of times you stop and you're like, why did I just stop? I'm on the major road. But you also have to remember there's other major roads, right, that are intersecting that also might be connected. And so
it could be a road that I think the major road is the one I'm on, but it could be some road.
Even if it's not the major road.
Yeah, 5 roads over could be affecting my road.
It could, even if it's not the major road, like you could be intersecting with a minor road that's not more major than what you're on, but still carries a lot of traffic, and it is also interconnected. And so something has to give along a roadway network. So
I need to just find better roads.
So it's better. It's better than just having them all act independently, but it's not going to be perfect.
All right. So how do you decide if a roundabout's right fit for a location with the community? Is it community driven, or are you as the design engineer saying, hey, I think a roundabout works here? Are communities really grasping on, or are you still doing a lot of public education?
I think it should always be thought about as an option. And there's actually some DOTs that require it to be considered at every intersection. And I think that's probably where we're heading, is that it has to be considered at least at every intersection. And so you want to look at, the traffic that you have there, if it's going to work. There's modeling programs that you can run to see whether roundabouts are a good fit. Then, of course, like right-of-way is always a concern. Is it feasible to build based on the available right-of-way that can be acquired? And then after that, public perception. Can you get the public to buy in? Because that's a big part of it, too, is the early on public education about how it's going to work and meeting people where they're at as far as their concerns about roundabouts and talking them through all of the different concerns, addressing them all one by one.
Absolutely. Now, something that as I look at my notes and as I think through it, we're talking about cars and trucks, but we also have the pedestrians and bikes. How does a roundabout help the foot traffic and the bike traffic, for people out on their nighttime walks and making sure they're safer?
As far as pedestrians, roundabouts can be safer for pedestrians. Because as you're approaching a roundabout, the crosswalk is in advance, and so you just have that one decision in front of you of whether there's a pedestrian in the crossing. Then once you get past that, then is the yield line, and then your attention turns to whether I can enter the intersection. And so in many ways, it's a lot safer because you're separating your different decision points, whereas at an intersection, you have a lot of different things going on.
Yeah.
Now, bikes can be a little bit challenging at times. If a roundabout isn't designed well for bikes, it can be an unsafe condition. But again, there are ways, whether it be bike lane or whether it be dismount from your bike and use the sidewalk to get around to the roundabout. But, it just all comes back to being designed appropriately for all the users.
So I think you've got me on board. I am trending pro roundabout.
Okay.
But I have a couple final questions for you to really seal the deal here. What's the one golden rule for driving through a roundabout?
So the one golden rule, especially on multi-lane roundabouts, because that's really where a lot of confusion comes in. The golden rule is as you advance, pay attention to your visual cues. And so a roundabout, as you enter, is designed to slow you down. And so you'll see this with curvature in the approach legs. And so pay attention to those cues, slow down, and then look at any signage. So which lane do I need to be in? That's especially important on a multi-lane roundabout. For example, if you're making a left turn, you need to be on the inside lane towards the middle of the road. Right. And then once you're in that lane and enter the roundabout, it should be designed properly so that you do not need to weave. So it'll exit you off the way, the direction that you need to go, or drop a lane that's on your right so you don't have to worry about moving over. So just pay attention to which lane you need to be in and follow the lane lines to the exit.
So last chance here. So you almost got me. If roundabouts had a slogan, what would it be?
I've got a cheesy one for you.
That might seal the deal.
About to make your intersection safer.
About to make. I like it. I actually really like that. I'm gonna look over my producer over there and say I want T-shirts. That for the drop of this episode, I want T-shirts. Well, thank you, Jason, for coming down. I am on board. I do as you explained it. It makes sense to me now. I think that to your point, when I was going through driver's ed, when I was growing up, they weren't prevalent. And now they are, so it's something new, and so you're having to learn. And that public education is very important. But to all your points, they're safer and they make more sense. So thank you for going down. Thank you for changing my mind. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Learning about roundabouts it was not something I came in here saying, I'm done, no chance, he has no chance. But they're safer. They reduce accidents. And I really love that vision zero. And the fact that we're trying to make sure that there's zero fatalities. And we have people designing roundabouts like Jason who are then looking towards the future for growth and making sure that everybody is getting home safely. If you liked our conversation today, like, subscribe, follow us. Listen to the next episode, which comes out the first Tuesday of every month. For our entire team here at Baxter and Woodman, have a great day.